Hey everyone, and welcome to Hero's Journey Physio Fitness. Our mission is to guide people in reclaiming their health and becoming self-reliant. I'm your host, Dr. Cameron Hogue, and joining me is my co-host, Annabelle Rios.
All right, we are going live in 3, 2, 1. All right, guys, welcome to Hero's Journey Physio Fitness. I'm here with Cam, and we've been doing a few interviews the past few episodes. Today we have another one. But before we get into it, guys, you need to like and subscribe. You got to feed the algorithm so it can show up to more viewers. Cam, who are we interviewing today?
Guys, we got a special guest. We have Dr. Jace Phillips. He is an outpatient physical therapist. He's gone through an orthopedic residency. He sat for his board exam, which he has his OCS, his orthopedic clinical specialty. Jace, thanks so much for being on, man. And,
thank you for having me.
Do you mind just giving the viewers just a little bit more about your educational background and all that stuff before we get into it?
No, absolutely. So kind of post-high school started with my first degree in exercise science, physical wellness. That's, I think, probably something that you hear repeated a lot for physical therapists, is kind of geared towards physical therapy school. After that, I went straight to UTC, actually, for my
hey!
I know, right? Yeah. So I went to UTC for my doctorate in PT, and have kind of had some post-doctorate trainings, like you said, residency with my OCS, which is national board certification, and then I'm also a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Those are kind of my accolades.
Yeah. Is that the CSCS, or which one is that one?
Yeah, CSCS.
Oh, wow.
And you were telling us earlier, also, was it a level 1 CrossFit coach? What's your CrossFit certification?
My CrossFit certifications, level 1, and then CrossFit Kids.
Gotcha.
So the level 1's a little bit more prestigious. You have to actually go and you take a test and that kind of stuff. CrossFit Kids is more just like, here's how to make this, kid
so I
friendly.
Guess what's the difference between the CrossFit 1 and the CSCS? Like, what are the emphasis on?
Yeah. So, CrossFit is a brand. So you go, you pay CrossFit HQ to take this course. It's run by it's all kind of this internal thing. And what they do is they take a lot of the ideas, and it's kind of like, here's what CrossFit is all about. Here's how we do these things. So there's some things in terms of form of, here's how we want to do our exercises. Here's how we want to program. But it's more about, here's how to coach with the mentality of CrossFit, which is high intensity functional movement, like, get in, get out, get your kind of your CrossFit style workout in, and it's how to be that coach. The CSCS, on the other hand, is done by the NSCA, which is the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So that's an American national organization, and they are more encompassing. So that's going to basically be your entryway if you want to be a strength coach at like high-level high school or college. That's going to be kind of your entry there. So included in that is going to be strength training principles, like here's how to train for power, here's how to train for strength, here's how to train for endurance, but also taking those things and in the idea of being a strength coach, here's how to apply that to a cross-country runner, here's how to apply that to a volleyball, and then they dabble in a little bit of the business stuff. Here's how to set up a gym to make it compliant with the national standards that you're going to be. I remember I had a question on that was like, the mirrors in the gym have to be this height above the floor so that the weights don't roll in and break it in, right? So it's more of basically, yeah. So the CSCS is really all about, if you want to be like a strength coach, that's going to be your foot in the door for that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's definitely a little bit different. One's more that brand of CrossFit, and the other one is like, you can pretty much do anything, high school, college. You'll have the tools, even if you want to set up your own gym, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And for the CSCS, they're not discriminate, but you do have to have a college degree to sit for the CSCS.
I think, I actually think I had heard that, because you had to prove like your degree, and then did it matter what it was in?
No, as long as you have, I think it's a 4-year degree, but don't quote me on that. I say as I'm being recorded. But
we'll edit that out.
Yeah, just a quick blur. What was that? But yeah.
Okay, so you definitely got a lot of background in health and fitness and everything. When did you like start your journey like personally and everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, so hilariously, up until I'd say pretty much through high school, I was dominantly a runner. And so I just went on a tangent about strength conditioning and CrossFit. But I was classic beanpole kind of thing through all the way through high school. I started actually running in cross country when I was in fourth grade. So I'm a lifer. Um, but is one of those things like certainly didn't really get passionate about it until after high school. I remember in fourth grade, my mom literally yelling at me to keep me from dragging my shoes on the concrete because I was just such a tiny little stutter step. I don't even know if you could call it a run. So I really wasn't into it at that point, but it was just kind of something to do. But really, really got passionate, I think, when I did start doing the kind of the cross training, CrossFit, weights, things like that, and learned how to take it on my own because I wasn't doing it for a sport. I was doing it for me at
Mm.
that point, and that's kind of when I really say that I got into it for myself.
So you did cross country in high school?
Yep, yeah, I did cross country, track, soccer were my main sports, but it was mostly running, pretty much up until, like I said, getting into more of like the fitness stuff later on.
And I'm guessing during those times you weren't really lifting much, even through
No,
your program, right?
no.
It's mostly just running and then running.
Yeah, so I remember my senior year of track, they sent us into the weight room, I think 3 times that season, which
Oh
hilariously, it's
wow.
like four
Perfect.
weeks apart. Yeah, it was just basically like we don't really know what we're gonna do today. The other teams aren't in the weight room, so like let's just like go into the weight room. And we did like a weird smattering of like 30 minutes of weights that I had never done before. So questionable on whether or not it was beneficial, but
We don't want to get too
yeah,
big, you know?
exactly. Yeah. You gotta stay aerodynamic. That's what it's all about.
So yeah, I think you're mentioning that it's when you got into college that
Yeah.
you started to kind of make this a little bit more maybe for yourself.
Yeah.
Did you notice any changes just with your like running and everything when you started to incorporate more cross training? It seems like when you started doing a little bit more CrossFit and maybe some more strength movements, was there any difference that you noticed?
Definitely. So, I did a couple different things. My favorite stuff was always like the mid-level things. So that's going to be your 400 meters, just one lap around the track. It's a quarter mile, and the 800. And so, in terms of physically what's going on, it is a little bit different, from the long, steady distance type of stuff. It requires a little bit more power. It's more in the realms of uses your muscles like strength would do. Um, and I remember thinking, just playing around with some 400s, things like I hadn't been practicing or anything like that. And I was like tying my PRs after having done some of this strength training, just because the power was there, like the output was there. And I just remember thinking, like, why the heck was I not doing this when I was actually doing this, you know, uh, competitively?
Right. No, man, I totally agree with you. Like looking back on it, it's almost like the weight room was at least in my and like how I grew up and everything was like a hindrance maybe like it's
Mm-hmm.
something you did like maybe in the off season handful of times but really you just got to focus on your sport and for you it's like you got to focus on running me it
Yeah,
was baseball just practice skill all this kind of stuff and I'm looking back now like man I can squat like 200 pounds more than I could in high school like that would have translated way better
yeah,
into like running and my swing and all that stuff so it's kind of like a disappointment that I figured it out later when I wasn't
yeah,
playing competitively.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's what we're doing the podcast so we can tell
yeah.
people and get people back into into their optimal self and everything.
No, absolutely. So I guess what did your workout programs look like when you were in college starting to work out versus how they look now?
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. So when I first started, I was going to the college weight room. And I was basically, it was a very similar scenario. I had a friend who I knew him in high school, and we ended up going to the same college with, and we had both done cross country, soccer, that kind of thing. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just, the two
Some
of us
big
together.
legs.
Yeah, well, but the up top, the two of us together could, squeeze into a medium shirt probably. Um, but we were, we're in there and we had literally no idea. And so we would go to like the chest press machine. I remember putting like 70 pounds on, and I'm like, that looks like a good weight. And it was like way too much for me. Like I was just had no idea what I was doing. And we're like, well, how many do you want to do? And no guidance, no direction, no anything like that.
Hmm.
And that lasted about 3 weeks, I think. And then we were basically just like, well, that was cool. We gave it a shot. And so what I did after that was in my first semester of college, I actually joined the local CrossFit gym. And that's kind of how I started getting into that. And they offered, to their credit, a beginner intro class that was a
Hmm.
couple times a week. And it was basically like, here's how to be safe. Here's how to do these motions. Like, here's why we program workouts like this. Here's the terminology, right? You hear CrossFit loves their acronyms.
Right.
And so, people, it could be very intimidating. And so it was basically like, here's how, here's how to read these things. Here's how to do that. And it made it very approachable. And so getting into that, it basically just put my foot in the door to that whole community because it's a pretty popular gym. There's a lot of people. There's the whole spectrum. I mean, you had these
Hmm.
guys who were, bursted through walls, and then you had people like me who were just getting started. You had people who were in their 40s and 50s who hadn't worked out in 20 years, who were taking this course to kind of get back in it. And then they kind of just eased you into the courses. And I think that was huge in terms of why I stuck it out, was because it was very approachable, and it was very introductory friendly. And so I think that allowed me to kind of get with it. And then, when you get in the habit, it becomes easier to do those things. But definitely, from that, I was just solely CrossFit for several years.
Gotcha. Um, yeah, the whole accountability aspect that CrossFit provides, and like you're saying with like getting introduced to it, like if you don't know what you're doing, like it's like really scary to walk into a like a weight room or anything like that and not knowing how many sets do I do, what exercises do I pick, and to have someone kind of like guide you through
Yeah.
is great. I think it's good that now with the internet and more gyms opening up that there are more things offered so that it gives people a wider entry level so that they can get in. But at the same time, you have to seek it out. Like you
Yeah.
had to
Yeah.
you had to say like, no, I got to go. I need to try CrossFit so I can actually start to learn these things.
Yep.
So after you did CrossFit, is that when you got certified in it because you have been doing it for a while?
Yeah. So, a big thing that I did was not being naturally strong. I sought out. There was a couple of guys in the gym who had been doing it for a couple of years, but were also college age. So I'm 19 at this point, and these guys are probably like 21, and I thought they were so ancient and wise. But they were good, right? They were really skilled at what they did. And I was very fortunate that I went to a gym that really prized that, right? It wasn't just about, you know, barfing and what can we get through, but it was very much a skill oriented group of people. And so I sought these people out, and they were all over it. And so I learned the form, I learned how to do everything correctly, and I basically made it my goal is all these unique movements that you see in CrossFit, right? Like,
Hmm.
you see a lot of stuff like most strength programs you're going to have squatting in them, and CrossFit as well, but like who does an Olympic snatch, who does a muscle up, things like these that you don't see. Um, and at that point, I made it my goal that I want to at least be able to do one of everything in here, everything that this place has to offer. And so I basically just I did that, and I think through that, they saw like, oh, it's good form, good things like that. And now again, not being super strong, I had to get good at the technique to give
Hmm.
myself a leg up. And so I think over about a year and a half of that, the owner of the gym saw that, hey, you've got decent form. You may not be the strongest guy in here, but you're, smart enough. You've got the form enough. You're good with people, and so they actually sponsored my CrossFit certification
Oh, that's sweet. That's
so that
legit.
I could go and coach with them for a couple of years. Yeah,
Um, so since you've done CrossFit, you're a certified coach, and you're also a physical therapist.
yeah.
What would you say are some pros of people looking to get into CrossFit, and then maybe we can talk about if there's any potential cons about people wanting to get into CrossFit.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, I would definitely say pros are going to be what you touched on, right? We've got accountability. But more than accountability, I think you've got a lot of just community, right? You've got people who they will do events. They'll do Friday night, everybody gets together. They'll do Saturday, bring your friend or your partner or whatever. And so I think just this level of like social, engagement, you get a lot of that kinds of thing. And then also you show up and they tell you what to do, right? So if you're
Mm-hmm.
not one who wants to nerd out and do your own programming, if you don't know what you can do, things like that, I mean, you show up and they have it written on the whiteboard, and this is what we're doing today, kind of thing. And so it's very much one of those. Once you get into the rhythm, you get to show up, you get to do it. It's really high intensity, so you're typically it's about an hour that they have blocked off for the classes, and so it really fits nicely if you're like, I just got to show up and get my workout in and go. It fits really nicely, and just the fitness of it. It's nice, right? They work on cardio, they work on strength, they work on things like that. Um, yeah. Um, I will say that's kind of when, and I think that's the intent of CrossFit. That's when CrossFit's done correctly.
Right,
I think
right.
a lot of what are the cons that you see, and when it was gaining popularity, I mean, it's kind of like CrossFit was, put on these same areas as like, CrossFit and vegans like can't shut up about, themselves. And so it kind of got, you kind of get this rap,
Yeah.
talking about injuries, right? People are like, oh, PT and a CrossFitter, like, you're drumming up business there and stuff like that. You get all sorts of stuff like that. Um, and
Yeah.
and I think it's if you look at it, it's a lot of it is when the priorities of fitness kind of get out of place, and
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
when the competitive side of CrossFit gets put above the safety side and the skill
mm,
side and the technique side. And that's what you see, the way that the CrossFit gyms are is that, each gym is its own affiliation. And so there's kind of this governing headquarters, but each gym has its own culture and its own etiquette and its own whatever. They do their own programming. And so you got to find the spot that's going to work for you. Because if you go into a
mm.
place that all they say is just go more, go harder, go faster, and you're not ready for that, then you maybe set yourself up for injury.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know what you're doing, then you don't know, right? And so I think it's kind of one of those things that it can be taken out of control and people can get themselves hurt doing things.
No,
Yeah.
that makes sense. How would I don't know if you know the answer to this, but how would a person know, like, if they were going to look into a gym, like, if it's going to be more on that competitive side of things,
Yeah.
or if it's going to be more of like, hey, there's other people that look like
A
me.
beginner friendly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So typically, like, they're all gonna have their own website, so you can get a little bit of a vibe on that. I always tell people, like, if you're really want it to be intro friendly and you want it to be beginner friendly, if you find a CrossFit gym that doesn't have a beginner class, like,
Don't do it.
It's not for you.
it's not for you.
Yeah.
But then too, a lot of what these places have is they have like try it out fees or drop in fees or things like that, where you can come in and you can pay for a class, one at a time. And so stuff like that. So, if that's something that you're interested in, I always tell people, just go check it out, go look. They've got, whatever packages, deals that you can do to try it out rather than, going based on stuff. Which that is, I forgot to say, another con is CrossFit tends to be pretty pricey. Um, and so
Mm-hmm.
that could be a big barrier to a lot of people trying to get into it. But yeah, you can search them out, you can go, you can try, you can, kind of take one at a time and just feel the vibe out for yourself.
Now that makes sense, and I guess that is one of the things I've heard with CrossFit is the community aspect. Is why people keep coming back. That's why it's grown so much. But like anything else, you do have to check each individual gym. Maybe it doesn't fit with you. Maybe they're not so focused on teaching beginners, but more so competitive
Yeah.
CrossFitters who are
Yeah.
maybe trying to go to the games. And that may not be your gym. So it's very interesting.
How'd you get into, so you're big into the ultras now. I mean,
Yeah.
I know you'd done a bunch of running. Looks like then you switched and kind of transitioned to CrossFit and more like strength type stuff. And how'd you get into ultras?
Yeah. So my
Oh, maybe we
kind
should
of
say,
a
maybe you should tell everybody what is an ultra,
Or an
so that
ultra.
Yeah,
way,
let's
Yeah,
back
yeah, yeah.
up.
Ultra.
back up.
Yeah, it's very exclusive. If you don't know, then we're not going to tell you.
You're not in.
Uh, um, so an ultra is short for ultra marathon, and essentially what it is it's a marathon plus. So there's no one distance that is an ultra marathon. It's basically anything that is more than your 26.2 miles, which is a marathon. Um, so the type of ultras that I do are 50K, which is going to be about 31 miles. And what you find is that most ultras are actually trail runs. So
Hmm.
once you get past that marathon distance, you're going to get more and more into the trail running. And that can look like, dirt gravel roads. That can look like really technical rocky stuff that you feel like you're going to, trip and slip and all that stuff. So it can be
Mm.
lots of elevation up and down mountains where you're, so it is very a wide variety. But anybody who says that they
Mm-hmm.
do ultras, your popular distances are going to be your 50K, 100K, so that's going to be 62 miles. Your 50 milers and your 100 milers. So those are
Hmm.
like the big four distances of ultra marathons. Yeah, they're typically way slower in pace than your normal marathon because you're not on flat road. And so not only are your distances longer, but typically your paces are slower because you're over roots and rocks and things like that. You're typically going to get a lot more elevation with that. So it's kind of just a whole different beast. I like to compare it mountain biking versus like road biking. Um,
Mm.
there's kind of a whole different aspect to it. But yeah, so that is kind of what I'm into in terms of consistently. Um, I've got a couple of those. I've got a couple on the books for the future.
What, Leadville 100? Death
Yeah,
Valley?
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Twice around. No, but that's a great example of a very popular ultra, right? Leadville 100. They're basically right outside of big, peaks in Colorado, and they're just humming over it, and they might be doing 18, 20-minute miles at some point. But then they
Mm.
turn around and they come down, and then they're bombing down.
Hmm.
So it's a whole thing.
How does someone even begin to get into that?
Mhm.
How do you
So
even train for that?
Yeah, how
yeah,
do you
yeah,
even
yeah.
train for that?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's like with anything, right? Beginner friendly stuff. I always tell people the first time you do a distance, you do the distance, right? You don't race the distance. You don't whatever the distance. And so, there's depending on who you are, if it's something that you're into, right? If you want to learn to be an ultra marathoner, you start with something that's not an ultra marathon. Um, Running is awesome in that you can find all levels of competition, all levels of things, right? Anywhere from a mile run to a 5K run to, half marathons, 10Ks, all that stuff. And you can find that same thing with trail running, right? So, um, what I tell people is, you know, find something like if you want to be, or if you're interested in being ultra marathoning, um, you first got to decide if you like running, right? Because if you don't like running, you're not gonna like running for 30 miles. So it's one of those things that it's about taking it to, that next level. So for people who are more casual, and this is typically where you find this question is, hey, I've done a half
Yeah.
marathon. I like to do 4 to 5 miles on the weekend, stuff like that. But like, how do I bridge that gap from there
Hmm.
to an ultra marathon, which is a completely different question from I've never run a day in my life. How do I run an ultra marathon? Like two very different questions.
Mm-hmm.
But when I tell people, it's mostly about, anything fitness, right? It's great at exposure. It's one, getting yourself used to more distances, more time, those kinds of things, but also different terrains. So I'm a big fan of if we're going to bump things up, we go one variable at a time, right? So if you're not used to trail running and that's very intimidating, go on short trail runs. Get yourself used to that. Get yourself, feel for that. The ultra community is also not snobbish in the idea that there's a lot of people who actually hike up hills, right? Or
Yeah.
something that's really technical, as in Rocky, Rudy going down. Like, take your time with that. Be safe with that. You'll see a lot of
Mm-hmm.
these big things, and there's, in the really steep races, even the winners are hiking up the hills, right? They're not bounding up these mountains or anything like that. Now they're bombing down them for sure. And so, being
Yeah.
allowing yourself to be comfortable and kind of working at your own pace. But that's what I tell people is start with some shorter trail runs. And if you love that, then you can start to build that distance, build that thing. But it's really, I mean, the only barrier to entry beyond normal running is they make shoes specifically for trail running, right? All your running brands, your Nikes, your Hokas, your Saucony or whatever's Ultras, they all do trail shoes, and it's basically a running shoe with rubber tips on the bottom of them so that you can grip the dirt a little better. Outside of that, that's like your only barrier from normal running to trail running or ultra running. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think sometimes too, like what you're saying with like you said graded exposure, and maybe for those listening not that don't know what that is, it's basically slowly exposing your body to more and more stress. Like if you haven't worked out in a while, you won't be able to go deadlift 500 pounds. So why do you think you'll be able to go run 30 miles? Like
yeah,
with running too, like you have to be able to take it slow and let your body adjust and adapt to that constant, single leg pounding on the pavement or the train that you're on, or else it could result in potential injury.
yeah.
How would you tell like our listeners, how would they prevent injuries if they're wanting to get into ultra marathoning?
Yeah. So a couple things, to be aware of. There's kind of two kinds of running injuries, right? There's traumatic and non-traumatic, right? So we've got this quick thing happened, I rolled my ankle, and then we've got more of our overuse type of stuff. Um, and so to speak on the more, I'll say the easier answer with some of the trauma stuff is you can't really avoid all that, right?
Mm.
So being afraid of that. But what I tell people is, you know, be smart in what you're doing and what you're comfortable with, right? If you're not comfortable bombing down a section and you think you're going to roll your ankle, start slow, work your way into those things. But at some point, there's an amount of random variability that you're not going to be able to prevent all of those things. The overuse stuff, and it's a quote that I did not make up, but I love. It's a lot of times you see it's doing too much at once after not having done enough for too long, where it's just too much of one thing that you're not prepared for. And I think something to be aware of is, doing these kind of ultra distances is going to work your body a little bit differently than anything else, right? And the best way to get good at something is to do that thing or as close to that thing as possible. So what I find in the trail aspect of things, your ankles are going to work a lot harder. Your hips are going to work a lot harder. So as opposed to road running, it's more in one direction, right? Your hamstrings are going to be working, your calves are going to be working. Whereas trail running, there's a lot more like lateral, side to side stability stuff that you got to work on. So the sides of your
Mm-hmm.
hips, the sides of your legs are going to be working a lot harder because those muscles aren't used to this unsteady terrain, these uneven things. And so you got to keep that in mind. So if you're a master half marathon runner and you then are going on to run these trail distances, you got to keep in mind that while your hamstrings, your cardio might be up to this, you may be exposing your different muscles to stimulus that they're not quite ready for. And so it's kind of like treating it as a different sport, I think puts it into a different perspective where people are like, oh, I love road running. I do awesome. And then it's like, as soon as I get on the trail, everything falls apart. And I'm like, well, it's because it's two different things, right? And
Hmm.
and and knowing that, and treating them differently. I think a lot of people, they can get discouraged with that. Times again are typically very different, right? So somebody who's running a 6, 7 minute mile, which is good, when they're out running on the roads, may see themselves running an 8, 9 minute mile on the trail or slower, just because it's
Mm.
a whole different ballgame. So whenever you're introducing yourself to something, even if it's like something you've done before, giving yourself that grace and kind of allowing that graded exposure, like this is a whole new thing. And so that's what I tell people is don't get on the trails and expect to perform like you would on the road. you got to give yourself that time to adapt.
So, so okay. So that's a good perspective. There are two different sports. You got to think about it that way. You've kind of talked about beginners need to increase their time on their feet,
Yep.
whether that's on the road, on the trail. And you've talked about some taking it slow and trying to figure out how to navigate the trails or potentially the road. What else do you do? And you mentioned, I think we talked about before the video, is some cross training. What kind of
Yeah.
lifting would you prescribe to a potential road runner versus a trail runner?
Yes, yeah, great succinct summary. Of me. I for cross training, what I typically tell people is strength training is it's building your muscles, it's building your tendons, right? So whenever we're lifting weights, we're putting load through our tendons, which is going to make them thicker, tougher, more resistant to our overuse, our itises of sorts. So what I'm telling people is, I love to squat. I think squatting, right? Heavy squats, whatever that is for you, right? Because heavy is relative to the person.
Mm-hmm.
But heavy squats doing these things that put these loads through your body, right? So we're working our hips, we're working our knees, which you see a lot of stuff like runners, knees, those kinds of things, right? Squat puts a ton of load through our patellar tendon, which is as our quad attaches to our knee. It's going to really increase the robustness of that tendon, which is going to make it more resistant to these overuse type of things. For runners too, jumping, right? We're talking box jumps, we're talking jump rope. So plyometrics, which is essentially your bouncy stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
anything running is a plyometric, right? So
Yeah.
simply put, anything that you are kind of doing these quick rebounding types of things, those are really gonna again put kind of that load, that pulling
Yeah.
tensile load through your tendons, which is gonna just make them tougher, stronger, and more resistant to injury. So squatting and jumping would be my two big cross training things for runners.
Two big ones. Because I know with the running community, cross training, it's gaining some more popularity, but it's not
Yeah.
always been there. So, what would you say for someone who's maybe a little bit newer? Because a lot of listeners are starting their fitness journey. What would that split look like between running and lifting?
Yeah. And I like that you kind of mentioned, I think a lot of runners are worried that if they do a lot of lifting, they're just going to bulk up, they're going to get bigger, they're going to get
I
heavier,
Yeah.
wish.
then they're not going to be, I know, right? Yeah. But if you do pure strength training in this way, they've shown that you're not going to put on, massive amounts of muscle, especially if you're primarily running. Strength training and muscle size training, two different things. So that's kind of
Mm.
one thing that I tell people is you can get stronger without putting on a ton of weight. And I think a lot of runners are resistant. They don't want to bulk up and be too heavy for their running or whatever.
Sure.
But in terms of splits, it's going to be what are your priorities, and that needs to be seen in how you're training, right? So if your priority is running, like you need to be running mostly, and then lifting, and depending on your time, depending on your availability, whatever your resources might be. But you can strength train an area once a week and still get benefits from that. Again, you're not necessarily training to hit the absolute highest number of whatever lift you might be doing, but it's
Sure.
accessory to your running. And so if you've only got one day to mix in that strength training, that's still one day a week is still going to be enough to allow some muscle adaptations, to allow some tendon adaptations. I always tell people consistency is the most important thing, right? So
Yeah.
allowing that strength training consistency more important than exactly how much you're lifting or which lifts you're doing, things like that. And so if a beginner friendly thing, I think running 3 days a week in some capacity. Now those runs are going to look varied. They're not going to be the exact same run. And then doing lifting
Mm-hmm.
once a week. I think that is a very beginner friendly way to do that. Because if you're not used to doing these things, 4 days a week is a ton uh, to be working out. And so that's, to me, a really good starter way to do that.
Jace, what I really liked what you said there is that, one thing that heavy is heavy. It doesn't matter if it's 50 pounds or if it's 500 pounds, and that you really can't go wrong getting strong. And even that one day a week is going to be enough, especially if your goal is running. You're not trying to be a power lifter.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not enough if you wanted to be a power lifter, but it is enough if you wanted to prevent injury while you run. So I think sometimes in maybe people's mind, it's like, oh, I have to be as strong as I can. I got to deadlift 600 pounds and run a 6 minute mile. It's like,
Yeah.
those are freak of natures that they've been doing that for like 15 years to get to that point. You're not going to be that. You don't need to be a power lifter and an ultra marathoner, but you can get at least one day of strength training in
Yeah.
and continue to run and build that resistance or that, the resilience and making your
Mhm.
muscles, tendons, ligaments all stronger with that.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing, right? It's you're not strength training to be better performing strength trainer. It's supplementing, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
supplement to your tendons. It's not the stimulus of getting that load through your tendons, things like that. Um, yeah.
All right, Jace, I got a question for you.
Okay.
What do you think, and I guess this could apply to trail or on the road, but what do you think of heart rate training? I know that's gotten more popular in
Mhm.
the past couple of years. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So heart rate training it's all about looking at what your body's perceived intensity is. We hear about things like scales of rate of perceived exertion types of things.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found is heart rate highly correlates with basically how hard your body's working, right? So the higher your heart rate, the harder your body is working. And those things might not correlate with how fast you're going, with um, your paces and things like that. So I think the big thing is kind of a check-in, to see like what is your body doing, right? Because if you don't sleep well, if you are stressed out from other things, right? Because we all have stuff going
Mm-hmm.
on in our lives, right? Stress is stress to the system. And so if you've already been stressed or haven't recovered from before, the one pace on a certain day versus that same pace on another day might have a little bit different heart rates. And so the idea is kind of listening to your body. It's like intuitive training, like going based on what your body's intensity is. I think that's a perfectly wonderful way to train. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think you have to. But it's a really good way to check in to see like how hard is my body working? How is it responding to this exercise? And of course, all that stuff's going to change, right? Variable terrains, and then all the other things I talked about that you're bringing to the table with you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I like that as a way to do it, especially if you're doing something for the first time, because the goal is as you're building up to something again, it's just to do it, right? And so you want to train your body where it's comfortable, where you're teaching your body how to do this new thing that it hasn't done before. And so using heart rate to be very intuitive with how you're feeling, how you're responding, I think is a really good, healthy way to do it.
Yeah, I know when I was training for and ran a marathon, I would have days where like I don't know whatever that day was, like
Yeah.
5 miler, that like it would feel I would just be flying, like floating
Yeah.
down the road, and then the next week it's another maybe it's programmed 6 miles or whatever, and I'm like that was the most brutal run that I've had.
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying play is right into that. Like, how'd you sleep last night? Are you stressed? Are you running your easy runs too hard and your hard runs too easy?
Yeah.
And sometimes maybe the heart rate, like watching that, can give the runner maybe a little bit better idea of where they're at that day, and can
Mhm.
kind of stay within that. Well, I think what is it like? They want 70 to 80% of your max heart rate, or maybe
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
lower on some of the like majority of your runs.
Yeah, you're typically going to find it in the mid 100s. You've got your heart rate zones. I don't have them memorized off the top of my head. Um, but yeah, it
Five
is.
zones,
It's
right?
yeah.
It's five.
Uh, 5 zones. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's the idea that you're kind of staying in that middle zone. It's something that you can
Mm-hmm.
sustain, because your heart rate and your oxygen, the amount that you're getting to your body, like oxygen saturation and respiratory rate, they all really highly correlate. So, VO2 max is something that people like to talk about, and that's basically the level of how well your body is getting oxygen to your blood, to your organs, things like that. And we found that heart rate is kind of the simplest thing that you can look at that correlates with all those more complex types of things. And it kind of takes the mystery out of it, right? Like if you're working out and you're like, oh, am I just, there's this idea is like, oh, am I just, tired? Am I just not paying attention? Am I just distracted? But if you have this like hard data to look at your heart rate and say, oh no, my body is working hard. And just like, I just have other things. And I think having that number of heart rate kind of takes the mystery out of kind of the being intuitive with your body and how you're feeling and things like that.
Would people need like a heart
chest
strap, or would a Garmin work just fine, or whatever watch?
Totally depends on the Garmin. And the most accurate is going to be the chest strap. And you can buy, it's like anything, right? You can spend, a little bit of money, you can spend way too much money. Most of the watches that are coming out these days are, they do have a heart rate monitor on them. And so all the Apple watches that are coming out, all the Garmin watches, Coros is a new brand of watch that's they've got a couple different models out, but they're kind of a Garmin competitor. All their stuff has heart rate monitors on them. So if you've got a watch that has that on there, unless it's telling you something crazy, I always tell people like you can trust that. Like maybe it's 2 or 3 beats a minute off, but like that is not going to make or break your thing. Now, if you're running and it says that your heart is beating 30 beats a minute, obviously there's some sort of disconnect, right? So like look for those weird things. But in general, if you've got a watch that has that heart rate monitor on them, like they're going to do good. And they usually give you real time right there. So as you're running, you look down at your pace, you see what your heart rate is, and it's that quick instant feedback that you're looking for.
I found it too that it can kind of help a runner not to go out too hard. Because I think sometimes they're looking at the time, but when you're focusing on the heart, it kind of controls it a little bit. Like, okay, I'm pushing myself too much right now. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna burn out.
Or when you start, or when you start any race, I feel like everyone's a little jacked up. Heart rate's kind of going even before you start.
Adrenaline is a lovely thing.
Yeah, and you're just ready to go.
That race juice that's running through your veins. Yeah, you'll look down at your watch and you're like, "Holy crap, that was 2 minutes faster."
Pump the brakes, man.
And you're like, "What's going on here?" No, that's real. Something about that, but yeah, it does. Right? It keeps you in check. That's a great way to do it. Is it makes you a little more scientific and kind of allows you to be more consistent.
All right, so there's running, and then there's things called triathlons, which are a little bit bigger of a beast here. So you've done some of those as well. Now, I think I'd asked you earlier if you've done an Ironman or not, and you were kind of trying to explain that to us. Do you mind telling us like what's a triathlon, what's an Ironman? Explain that to everybody.
Okay, yeah. So to start with, like what's consistent across the board. So a triathlon, what you're going to see is you're going to see a swim, and then a bike, and then a run. That is a triathlon. That's consistent across the board. Now, the ratios of what you're doing is going to be very different. And to touch on, so when people, I think a lot of people hear triathlon, they also hear Ironman. And those are two different things. Ironman it's a company, it's a brand. They put on races and they do a really good job at it. But they are a trademarked brand. And they specialize in 2 different races. They have the Ironman, and then they have the half Ironman, or the 70.3. So those are owned by Ironman. You pay Ironman Incorporated, whatever it is, to participate in their races. And like I said, they're pricey, but they're organized. They take care of everything for you and that type of stuff. So you're getting a lot of that flair, and you're getting a lot of this kind of they foster this competitive environment when you do that. However, to do a triathlon does not necessarily mean that you're doing an Ironman. So the 2 popular distances outside of your half and your full Ironman is going to be an Olympic distance. And essentially what that's going to be is more or less half of a half Ironman. And then you have your sprint distances, which is going to be about half of an Olympic. So to break that down, we have a local sprint and Olympic that gets put on by a different company. And the sprint is going to be about a 1/4 mile swim. So it's going to be about 400 yards. The bike is a 12-mile bike, and the run is a 5K run. And it's excellent. There's a lot of those out there. And so to find those races, really all you have to do is Google sprint distance triathlon. And you can find those. They're in cities all over the place. And you can find those. And then Olympic is basically going to be basically double that. So you're going to have about a half, maybe a little bit more on the mile swim. You're going to have about a 25-mile bike, and then you're going to have a 10K to finish it off with. On those shorter distances, there's variability. So you may have one that's a little bit more swim dominant. You may have one that the bike is a little bit, and that's usually just based on geography, right? Because our roads weren't designed, 50 years ago with Olympic triathlons in mind. So, you kind of work with what you got. So you may see some variability there when it comes to those sprint or those Olympics, but they always tell you, you go on their websites and stuff, and it can be anything as casual from like just your local triathlon group putting it on. And then there are companies that are similar to Ironman that specialize in building that race feel, where they've got these big transition setups. They've got these big blow up arches that you run through and get your picture when you take it. And so it can, it all just depends on what you sign up for.
So you said earlier with like running, like basically all you need are a pair of shoes. Like if you're going to trail run, you pair of trail running shoes, and then you're good to go. What would somebody need in order to start either training or compete in a triathlon race?
Yeah, well, it depends on how gutsy you are, really. I have seen somebody perform a triathlon on a rented city bike, and wearing jean shorts.
Legit.
Like you can really cheese these things if you want to. And again, I think that's a big thing, big barrier, cost of entry. So what you need is really let's talk bare minimum. You need a bike. And you need a pair of running shoes. So
no goggles.
I would certainly prefer that you wear goggles if I was talking to you. The $20 is worth it. But you could backstroke the whole thing if you wanted to. They'll give you a swim cap. So but yeah, realistically, we'll do goggles, a bike, and your running shoes. So for these shorter ones, especially, like you don't need the big wetsuit, swimsuit, things like that. You don't even necessarily need a suit with like the cycling butt pads, right? They're awesome. They make your butt look good. But when you're on those shorter distances, you don't necessarily need those. Like you could do it in running shorts, or I got a pair of shorts they look kind of like those. They're like down to the knee length swim shorts or whatever. They don't have a butt pad or anything like that, but I've worn those for sprint triathlon. Because realistically, you're only going to be on the bike for 30, 45 minutes. So you don't need all those crazy gears, all the crazy gear for this. You don't need the shoes that clip into the bikes. You can do them on what they call flats, which is just like your classic thing. And your tennis shoes and your running shoes, people do that. I think what people a lot of times they see is they see like the most expensive, right? There's people who have $10,000 like triathlon setups, and they have bought 1% efficiency, and so
but they look good.
Yeah, but they look good, right? Like their helmet, it looks like the alien thing as it comes back behind them. If that's your thing, if you have the money, that's awesome. But like you don't need that stuff. And honestly, there's nothing more satisfying than passing somebody who's got that gear on. And, you don't say anything, but they know.
On your rented city bike.
Yeah, on my rented city bike.
What's your Yorks?
But yeah, no, I mean, you'll see it, especially these entry-level triathlons. You'll see people on like a Walmart bike, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with, right? They're out, just on their regular kind of roadie bike, commuter bike, stuff like that. Yeah, there's the whole spectrum.
So I guess let's talk training for an Ironman / triathlon. You have, your run, bike, swim.
Yep.
how do you break that up throughout your blocks? I don't know how you split it. Do you, one day you're running, one other day you're swimming, or how does that work?
Yeah. So there's a lot of good resources. You can find a lot of these things online, especially like if your goal is just to do it. I mean, you can Google like sprint triathlon training program, whatever. But the kind of meat and potatoes, right? You got to make sure that you're doing those three things.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of priority, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bike, run, then swim. Those are my kind of my priorities. And the reason I do that is because that is how, in terms of time in those events, you're typically going to spend most of your time doing the bike.
Mm.
Um, you're going to spend the second most time doing the run, and then swimming is typically where you spend the least amount of time in. So if you're crazy, crazy fit on the swim and you're doing these shorter triathlons, like you may have bought yourself 30 seconds versus if you're moderately fit in the swim. Um, Whereas if you take that extra day and you take that into running or biking, then you may have gained yourself a couple of minutes. And so it's all about prioritizing. So you don't need to be a master swimmer, especially on these shorter distances. I just tell people be able to swim that distance without taking a break in the pool, and like you'll be okay. Um, so then from there, it's basically I do bike. I'm a better runner anyways, just because that's my natural background. So I spend more time on
Sure.
the bike because that's where my weakness is, and that's where I spend most of my time in the race. But you could argue that the kind of the bike and the run are equally important um, in terms of fitness wise. So yeah,
Yeah. So there's, bike, run, swim.
yep.
Do you program any weight training into that, or is those three enough?
No, I will do so. Triathlons are tricky as opposed to running, which is you can just do running then weights. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do this, I will typically spend one day in the week um, doing kind of my cross training. So I like the powerlifting style type of stuff. So that's going to be, your back squats, your deadlifts, and your bench presses. And then maybe hop on some of the machines like the quad machine, the hamstring machine, just to get, again, just some resistance. There's nothing wrong with those, working the machine, but just more to get the resistance through the tendons and the muscles and things like that, just to kind of keep that stimulus up. But I'll typically spend about one day, 2 days if I just have the free time.
Mm-hmm.
But a good way to do it is, maybe have one bike day, one run day, and then one bike run day, where you get your legs used to hopping off the bike and doing a run. And again, it's not about speed; it's just about getting your body used to that stimulus. Because running after you've just sprinted out on the bike is way different. Like you look like a baby deer. It's pretty funny actually. But you got this like little trot hobble thing that you do because you got to find out where your quads are. So getting your body used to that. I did not my first triathlon do that. I didn't train for that at all. I remember getting off the bike and I was like, this is going to be awesome. And I almost fell over. And this was after a 12-mile bike. Like this was not an Ironman. But getting your body used to that. So if you wanted to give yourself, that's a big one. That's five, it's a 5 day split there. You got swim, bike run, and weights. But I would say again, it's kind of what we talked about in terms of the strength
Sure.
training. Like it doesn't need to be your strength day doesn't need to be 2 hours in the gym, hitting everything, hitting these high percentages of your strength or whatever. It's just about getting that stimulus in, getting that consistency in. Some people will do like they'll do swim day and they'll do just like a light swim and then go do some weights after or something like that so that they can just kind of combine it so that they're not in the gym or training 5 days a week. But it's one of those things you're going to get in what you do put out of it, or you're
I
going to
guess
get out of it what you put into it.
something
Yeah.
that we haven't touched on that just occurred to me. How are you fueling your body? Like,
Mm.
what are you eating? What are you doing pre-race, during the race, and then maybe post-race?
Yeah. So find what works for you is what I tell people, and don't surprise your body. Um, I always tell people when it comes to nutrition, try things out, find what works for your stomach. You'll see a lot of people who get stomach issues when they're, there's gels, there's goos, there's all sorts of stuff that's marketed. There's drink mixes that have, calories and caffeine and things like that. So for something that's going to be short like this, what I'm going to do is I may have one little gel nutrition that I'm going to eat on the bike. And then on my bike, I have two water bottle holders. One of them is filled with water. One of them is filled with a drink mix that has BCAAs, branched chain amino acids. Those are kind of your protein breakdowns. It's got caffeine, and that's most of it. Got a little bit of sugar just to kind of get you that fast energy. And so it's more about just giving yourself a little bit of a boost. You shouldn't be, full when you're doing these sprint stuff because it's fast, right? It'd be like, you don't want to eat a meal when you're running a 5K sprint. So you kind of find out what works for you. So I always, if I'm trying something new, I'll just take it on my training runs or training rides, and I'll just kind of see what works best for me. But in terms of fueling up, kind of leading up into these things, I mean, the biggest thing is you got to make sure through your training that you're eating enough, right? Because that's going to be your biggest thing, right? You're working your body hard. We got to make sure that you're getting your proteins to supplement, right? And then, healthy fats. I eat a lot of almond butter, that kind of stuff, just to get me those things. And then I'm going to eat, some carbs, but, I try to stay away from the sugars and things like that when I'm training because sugar is an inflammatory. So if you're putting your body into an area where it's being stressed, you got these, you're working your tendons, you're working your muscles, you make sure that you're eating somewhat clean, and not doing pro-inflammatories. But I'm not one that's like, I don't calorie count, I don't macro count, I don't do anything like that. Generally, I try to just eat good food. I eat when I'm hungry. I make sure that I get enough, of my protein, my healthy fats, and then I supplement the rest with carbs. So,
and you would say complex carbs, not heavily processed carbs for those who are listening.
Pasta sometimes is going to be good. Breads are good, things like that. It shouldn't be one of those things where you can't touch these things ever. But your good carbs. So we're talking fruit and veggies. We're talking those kind of things that actually have nutritional balance. I'll do rice and stuff like that. Just again, I want to make sure that I'm getting enough calories. So I'm not starving my body. And so I like to. I'll eat a little bit more, or I'll put another spoonful of rice on or something like that, just to make sure that, I'm replenishing what my body's doing.
I like what you said about don't surprise your body. Yeah. So the night before I ran a half marathon, I ate spicy spaghetti to carb load.
I love it.
And about had a blowout at mile 7. It was, I surprised myself.
So, and this is maybe a don't do as I do, but do as I say kind of thing. But my pre-race meal is always pizza and one beer before every race that I do, and I love it. And you can't convince me to stop doing that. But for whatever reason, my body loves that. I never have stomach issues. I never have anything like that. Whatever that is, And again, when it comes to that kind of thing. You find out what your body likes, what it doesn't like. When I'm doing ultra marathon stuff, I'm eating actually solid food. I do maybe a little bit of gels, but I'm eating, my two big ones are beef jerky and goldfish. So, yeah.
I love that.
You got your fats, you got your proteins, got a little bit of salty carbs. It's great.
And you're getting sufficient,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's the fish oil goldfish is only. So find what your body likes. I think is the biggest thing. Try things out. That type of stuff. Drink mixes, do a ride with one drink mix, see how you fare. Do a ride with another one, see how you fare. Try them out. Typically these things you can get sample sizes that you can order and stuff before you buy the big tubs of them. That kind of stuff. And then after the race, you eat whatever you want because you did a good job and you earned it.
Well, Jace, we've covered a lot in this episode, and I think you've given really good insights into all these different aspects that we talked about and tips and all that kind of stuff. Is there anything else that you want to let the listeners know that we haven't discussed yet?
I think a big thing is, if I had to say anything in terms of like my passion, is I would, don't let the official, intimidating looking stuff, don't let the pros of things scare you into getting into something. Because I promise, in all of these things, there is a whole spectrum. There are people who go out to marathons and they start and their intention is to walk the whole thing. And I think that's awesome. And so when it comes to these things, it gets really easy to get intimidated. If, that's not enough, then bring a friend, make it something that is enjoyable, that you're doing it for yourself, for your health, right? It's not worth, beating your head against the wall or hurting yourself or making yourself miserable. There's so many options to get out and to do things. And you don't know if you're going to like it unless you try it. And so that's kind of my thing, is just, don't be afraid to dip your toe in the water for stuff like that.
No, that's such good advice.
Yeah,
And
I like that.
I think the running community, just the whole triathlon running community, they're always so uplifting.
Mm-hmm.
And even like if you go to the gym, like usually people are more than willing to help other people out. It's usually the people that are not doing those things are the ones who are going to, throw the most shade, and not the people who are actually in the arena doing the work. And with all the training and stuff, like it's fun and you're reaping the health benefits. You're working your muscles, heart, lungs, and you're having, a good time, especially if you're competitive. So, Jace, thanks so much for being on, man. Annabelle, you got anything?
No, that's all I have. Thank you, Jace. And like I always tell you guys, remember, you're human. We should not seek perfection, but daily improvement. See you guys.